People of Reddit, what is the darkest secret you found out about a family member or relative? When I was a kid we went to my grandma's house every Sunday and all of my uncles and aunts would be there. One day I noticed that one of my uncles didn't show up anymore. So I asked my family where he is. They told me that he wouldn't be able to visit anymore because he moved away. Years later I found out that he raped and killed 2 women and they locked him up. My father tried to kill my mother while she was pregnant with me. Did he go to jail? No, he did not. I found out about this when I was 20. My mom told me in private. She said back then my father had a drinking problem and he would get really violent sometimes. She said something to him one time, so he grabbed a knife, pushed her next to an open window, and put the knife at her throat. Made her choose between jumping from the 4th floor or get her throat slit. My mom said she cried and begged him to not kill her and think of the unborn baby, me. Some neighbors heard the noise and intervened. They managed to take the knife away from him. She was safe. Police didn't get involved. This was during communist times, so back then apparently domestic issues like these were ignored. This was one of the times he was violent with her. My mom is religious and doesn't believe in divorce. They are still together after 45 years. His violent tendencies toned down after me, and my brothers were old enough to knock him out if he tried that shit again. I'm the only one in my family, besides my mom, that knows this happened. I've always had problems with him, but I hated him bitterly after my mom told me what happened then and other times as well. I'm not a religious man, but I wish hell existed, just so he could rot in it. 2 years ago I found out that my dad had a wife before my mom, and she died in a freak accident on their wedding night. Edited, she was sleepwalking and fell to her death over the balcony, if anyone was wondering. Stepfather was cheating on mother. Didn't find out because he was caught cheating. Found out because he and his mistress were drunk, got in a fight, and he punched her so hard that she fell over and died. Found out about the whole thing during the investigation, the trial, and the conviction. Was weird to have a lawyer want to call 2-year-old me to a stand to defend the character of man I already had very little interaction and a fear of, and that was before the manslaughter charge. I found out that my grandfather's first wife, before my grandma, died of botulism from eating some tomatoes she had canned at home. She could have been saved, but he refused to take her to the doctor because the botulism was her fault. He let her die to teach her a lesson. Edit, they had 2 kids he left motherless. A few years before he passed, my dad and I had a long heart-to-heart, at the end of which, he told me he wasn't the one to first sleep with my mom on their honeymoon. He caught her in bed with her cousin, with which she had been in love for a long time. He spoke with their pastor, who told him to forgive and forget. That worked, until 6 years later, when he caught her again, with the same cousin. He told me he wanted to leave with me, but ultimately decided to stay because he wanted me to have a family. With all that happened in my childhood, and to him, workaholic, diabetes, heart attack, I wish he'd left and be happy instead. Well, at least you know he loved you very very much. Long debate in our family as to whether my aunt fell out of the window of her flat, whether she jumped or was pushed. She survived, but with brain damage, and says she can't remember. I found out from my dad that one of my cousins isn't related to anyone in the family. My aunt and her mother used to work at a hospital maternity ward, and apparently a woman came in one day and gave birth to him and then left the next day without him. My aunt decided to adopt him, but a few months later the woman showed up again asking where he was. They both lied that he was given up and didn't have a clue where he was. They still haven't told my cousin anything. My great uncle is a papist that prefers underage family members. I don't know how many people actually know, but my grandparents certainly do, along with his victims, my mom, aunt, and I know at least a few or their cousins, but I'm not sure which. But then he found Jesus again, so we all have to forgive him and pretend nothing happened. It was before I was born, but that's the basic runaround I've gotten from my grandparents. They don't ever actually acknowledge it, just that Tony did bad things, but he found God. I eventually put 2 and 2 together about my mom's history or physical assault and her making sure that me and my female cousins were never left alone with him. And now that I'm in my 20s, that duty has been passed down to me at every family gathering. It's like an unspoken rule that you can't say why, just the warning. Don't leave your daughters alone with him. I'm tired of it though. Tired of shooing little girls away and having to pretend like it's normal. Scoping toddlers out of a predator's arms and acting like everything's fine and I'm just baby crazy. When this is all over, I'm not going to stay quiet anymore. The next time I have to around him, I'm taking children right back to their parents with the full ducking story of why it's dangerous. I'm tired of having to protect a papist to keep peace. My mother supposedly has a fraternal twin. My grandmother couldn't handle the thought of two kids, so she gave the male child away to someone she knew that was moving away. In a drug-induced rage one night my grandmother screamed at my mom that she kept the wrong child. It was never mentioned before or after that moment. My mom was roughly 12 at the time. She asked my great-grandmother about it and she knew the boy's name but not where they moved to or who he was living with. My mom actually had met him once but didn't know who he actually was. My grandmother denies it ever happened and my grandfather felt that surely they'd have had to tell me. I doubt they would have though. When she was pregnant with me, my mom asked my great-grandmother what my middle name should be. My middle name is actually his middle name. Edit. Fraternal twins, not paternal twins. My dad told me that, before my mom and dad broke up, he hadn't been happy with her for several years. My mother even had a miscarriage at one point, which destroyed the both of them. But he couldn't leave her, because he was afraid that she would hurt, or even kill herself. So his only thought was to have a kid with her, so that motherly instinct would hopefully prevent her from killing herself. I found out my father pegged my sister when I was 11 years old. She was only 7 when he was physically abusing her. My biological grandfather threatened to kill my grandmother while she was very young and pregnant with my uncle. Long story short, he was engaged to someone else. My grandmother became a nervous wreck while pregnant and wouldn't leave the house and he used to throw bricks through the window. Eventually she told some of her friends about what he'd threatened to do to her. Shortly after that he went missing, never to be seen or heard from again. We always kind of laughed and joked that one of her friends must have threatened him or ran him out of town. We would even go as far to say someone might have killed him for her. It wasn't until we were going through her boxes of photos and love letters we realized she was actually friends with the Cray twins. My uncle didn't have an aneurysm stroke spontaneously. Sorry, I'm not a doctor. He deliberately stopped taking his blood thinners. Dude was 63 with a wife, 4 kids and 15 grandkids, the oldest of which was 13 and the youngest was not even a year. He was just done. His wife doesn't know. His kids don't know. I only know cause I overheard the family doctor telling my dad. As far as I know, only myself, the doctor, and my dad know. I found out that my great-grandpa got away with murder. He thought that my great-grandma was cheating on him with her dentist, so he went into his office and shot him. He got away with it too, and they didn't find out that he did it until he told everybody before he died. Edit. Since a lot of people are asking if she actually cheated on him, I don't know. But, considering he was an asshole, that she was afraid to leave, and he ended up being capable of murder, probably. I've been suspicious of my wife getting drilled by the dentist for years. My uncle tells the story that when he was a kid, his older brother wanted him to go out hunting with him in the woods near their house. They woke up really early and started walking much deeper into the woods than they usually did and way off the normal trails they used. My uncle realized his brother was letting him get further and further ahead. He stopped and turned around to see his brother starting to bring the shotgun up in his direction. He asked him what the hell was he doing. His brother said, "Oh, I thought I saw something." My uncle decided to go back at that point. Later that week he went back and found a pit that someone had dug a bit further off the trail. He never went anywhere with his brother alone again. My great uncle was murdered along with his wife. The murder suspect was run down and got stuck in a swamp, shot himself in the head. The strange particulars. My uncle, his wife, and the murderer were all deaf/mute. The murderer was renting a room from them. This happened in the 40s, and no one ever found the motive. A few years ago, I took a DNA test and found that I had cousins who had descended from the murderer's wife. Turns out my great uncle was cuckolding him. One of my aunts raised another aunt's baby as her own. My mom had 4 sisters and a brother, all of whom got married and had kids, so I have around 20 cousins. Unfortunately, 3 of my aunts got breast cancer in their 30s. All 3 recovered, but years later the youngest, Mariah, got it again, and got it worse. Mariah needed a bone marrow transplant. All her sisters and children got tested, but no one matched. The family then revealed that Mariah had had a teenage pregnancy. Her first child was actually my cousin John, who had been adopted and raised by my oldest aunt as her second child. None of the cousins knew about this, including John and his revealed to be adoptive siblings. John was asked to get tested and was a match, so he agreed to donate bone marrow to his birth mom, Mariah. John was in his late 20s at the time and had had very little contact with Mariah over his life, so he's pretty cool. The transplant took, but Mariah eventually succumbed a year or so later. Edit. My family is very aware of the risks of breast cancer affecting any of us. Luckily none of my female or male cousins have gotten it. We are all still vigilant and self-check ourselves regularly. My mom and dad decided to take in my 3 cousins because their mom got into a horrible car accident. 2 girls and 1 boy. The girls were 6 and 10, the boy 12. Fast forward to when the 6-year-old girl is 14 years old and is asked about birth control. She starts sobbing, saying her brother, the then 12 years old, took her virginity when she was 6 and that it continued until she was about 13. We had no clue. Both of my mother's parents had affairs without the other's knowledge. My grandmother had Parkinson's, and in one of her confused states she told my grandfather that she had an affair. Suffice to say, my grandfather was not happy and put her in a home. He then started talking to my mother, trying to figure out when it could have happened. He speculated that it happened around the same time he was having his affair, which was around 1966. My mother was shocked. She was born in 1967. So my mother may or may not be related to the man she believed to be her father. Edit. Phrasing. My step-grandfather had a completely hidden life in Australia before he met my grandmother. He had a family and kids in Australia and faked his death by driving his car off a cliff, then moving to America. His kids thought he was dead until my grandmother found out about them and reached out years later. His son actually became a famous comedian over there, and from what I know, has a joke he does at his shows about his father faking his death to disconnect from them. Edit. Yes, it's Greg Fleet. I recently found out that my grandmother committed autodeath as a result of the physical abuse she received from her grandfather as a child, aged 8 to 14. Apparently her mother and many of her relatives were compliant with it and would even send her to his house for week-long visits, where she would sleep in his bed. A relative tried to poison one of their guests. Once I learned about it, it finally sealed the deal for me and forever changed my view on them. They were bonkers anyway, but good lord, that's too much. My uncle's family claimed he had polio instead of a hereditary crippling disease. His wife figured it out when she went to their family reunion. She already had 1 child and was pregnant with another. That my grandfather murdered his own brother to inherit his money. Edit. It's kinda funny that I received wholesome awards talking about how my grandfather was a murderer, lol. A cousin confided in me a month ago that she was molested by my grandfather when we were kids. She even told me that I was there with her when this was happening and I somehow don't remember anything about it. I hope he's burning in hell for it. Found out the hard way that my grandfather was a physical predator. Turns out my grandmother had been in denial despite both my aunts, their friends, and young girls in their small town claiming he raped/molested them. One 16-year-old even got pregnant, and he paid for the abortion. Grandma lied about his whereabouts/activities for years to protect him, because if he went to jail she'd be unable to afford their house. So, long story short, me and my then 10-year-old cousin were his latest and final victims. Thanks, Grandma. Since a lot of these are about murders and papists, mine is a bit funny. We once found a family photo album in my wacky aunt's house. Start flipping through the plastic pages and boom, gangbang photos. There had to be like 20 to 30 people in these photos. It was back in the 80s I'd imagine, and everyone was so hairy and ugly. I guess Aunt Jan is part of a swinging community. Edit. Wow. Thank you everyone. This is the first time I've gotten a lot of love on here. It's a funny story only me and my brothers know. We've always considered our Aunt Jan to be very weird, but after seeing that album it all kinda made sense. Nice lady though. Here goes. My two remaining grandparents, my father's father and my mother's mother, married each other when they were 75. This made my mother and father stepbrother and stepsister. Since the son of my father's sister, my aunt, is my cousin, and the son of my mother's brother, my uncle, is also my cousin, I became both cousins. I am, therefore, my own cousin. I'll never be alone. Well, my family is mega ducked as it is. Sister's living in a crack house on heroin. Brother and his wife are addicted to meth and coke. The other 3 siblings are all on coke. I'm literally the only one of us that saw that behavior and was like, yeah, not for me. 1990. I'm 5 years old. I'm at my dad's house after he left for 4 months to Tennessee. He frequently did that because he supposedly loved the state. My mom is watching America's Most Wanted, and a segment involved a man in Tennessee being murdered with a police sketch of the last person to see the victim alive. The sketch was an exact image of my dad. Supposedly a mutual friend of my parents went to the local police department on other business and the deputy asks, "Hey, have you seen Rich lately?" The friend responded, "Sure, couple weeks ago I saw him downtown." They insisted if he's seen, they needed to talk to him. If he did do it, he's an extremely good liar because he was never brought on charges to my knowledge. I've been estranged from him since I was 8. If you want more content like this, hit the like button and feel free to subscribe. It'd mean a lot.